So let me start on the first of the three things I want to talk about related to the life cycle. And if you ask me to summarize my corporate finance class, I actually do it on one page. This is all the corporate finance you need to know if you've never taken a corporate finance class. There are three basic principles or decisions driving businesses. There's the investment decision, where you decide what projects to take, what assets to invest in. And the principle that governs how you invest is a very simple one. Go out and take investments that earn more than your minimum acceptable hurdle rate. That's basically the rule. How you measure the hurdle rate and how you measure returns is full of details, but that's the basic principle. Take good projects. Fund them well. Remember I said there were two ways to run a business or fund a business? One is to borrow money and the other is to use equity. Find the mix of debt and equity that minimizes your hurdle rate. It's better to have an 8% hurdle rate than a 10% hurdle rate. And there's a third principle. It's called the dividend principle. And here's what it says. If you cannot find investments that make your hurdle rate, give the cash back to the owners of the business. Let them find a better place for it to invest. The investment principle, the financing principle, the dividend principle. Every business has to make investment decisions, financing decisions, and dividend decisions. Now let's think about how the focus of a business changes depending on where you are in the life cycle. When you're a startup, the only decision you really should be spending your time on is the investment decision. And here's why. How much money can a young startup afford to borrow? The answer is none. You should not be borrowing money, and here's why. When you borrow money, you got to make interest payments. Those interest payments, you can't make with potential. You can try, you can go to the bank and say, I have lots of potential. Can I pay with potential? It doesn't work. And if you ask me, how much can I afford to pay in dividends? What dividends? You're a young startup. You have no cash available to pay in dividends. Everything you do as a startup is built around making good investments. You got to build up those growth assets. As companies mature, they can start thinking about the financing principle. They say, what mix of debt and equity is right for me as a company? So as companies mature, you're going to see the finance part of the business take a bigger role. And then you're going to be declining businesses. Your job is to give cash back to the owners. The focus shifts to the dividend principle. The investment principle, the financing principle, the dividend principle. Young companies should be focused on investments. Mature companies can think about financing mix. Declining companies should be thinking about dividends. Remember at the start of the session I said that one of my biggest problems with companies is companies that refuse to act their age. I describe them as the equivalent of 50-year-olds wearing hip huggers. It is not appropriate. A young company that goes out and borrows money, I don't get it. Mature companies that try to go back to being young companies, I don't get. Declining companies that try to reinvent themselves as mature companies, I don't get. And in the process, they destroy value because they're trying to be something that they cannot be. So the next time you see a company doing something big, doing an acquisition, why? Because we want to be young again. Walmart bought Flipkart. Flipkart is an Indian online retail company, a company that is a money-losing machine that's been burning through cash for the last 10 years with no end in sight. Walmart paid $21 billion. I called it the most expensive facelift in history. Because that's what it was, a $21 billion expenditure. Why? Because Walmart wants to be young again. And like all facelifts, gravity works its wonders. And 3 years from now, Walmart will be back saying, what can we do next? So when companies refuse to act their age, their investors pay a price. Which brings me to the cash flow side of this equation. If you're a young company, remember, you're building up the business, you're investing a great deal, you're often losing money because you're building up businesses, you will tend to have negative cash flows. There is this notion called cash burn. Investors sometimes say, hey, that company is burning through cash. By itself, there's nothing wrong with the cash burn if you're a young company. Cash burn is a feature, not a bug for young companies, because they have to burn through cash to build themselves up. But if you're a good business, at some point in time, that cash burn has to stop. You have to start to generate positive cash flows. And I'm not being just old-fashioned here. That's been at the basis for business for as long as businesses have been around. It's not that you need to make money right from the start, but eventually you have to make money. So when you look at a business, one of the ways to identify where a business is in the life cycle is look at its cash flows. Last week, I valued Amazon. And this is a company that to me is the most difficult company in the world to value. And the reason is, I'm not sure what business it's in anymore. I used to think Amazon was a retail company. I no longer think it is. I think it's a disruption platform that can effectively go after any business on the face of the earth. And here's one thing we can guarantee with Amazon. Whatever business it goes into, I don't know whether Amazon will ever make money. But here's one thing I will guarantee you. If you're any other company in that business, I will guarantee you will now lose money. Do you know that the day Amazon enters any business, they enter the grocery business. Collectively, other grocery companies lost $40 billion in market capitalization on that one day. So whatever business you're in, every night get down on your knees and say, please God, don't let Amazon come into my business, because they will destroy your business and leave nothing there. So they're now a disruption platform with an army. You know what that army is called? It's called Amazon Prime. 110 million absolutely loyal members that they can turn loose on any business they want. So last week when I valued Amazon, I was trying to put in the life cycle. I'm not sure where it is right now. It's definitely not behaving like a mature company. It's actually behaving like a young growth company with $1 trillion in market cap behind it. It's never been seen before in history, and I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but it's going to be fun watching, but it's not going to be fun playing against it. So the reality checks that companies need to think about is, first, for young companies, you have to remember cash burn is going to happen. You can't fight it. For mature companies, you have to recognize things will start to slow down. You can't fight the slowing down of growth. And once you start declining, you have to start thinking about how do we give cash back to the owners. There's this big debate in the US about buybacks, about how buybacks are a terrible thing. And you've heard the story, right? When companies buy back stock, that cash is not being invested back in the company, to which my response is, what's wrong with that? Do you really want GM investing your money back into their business? If you look at the 100 largest business in the US, I would say 60 to 70% of these businesses, they are investing back in the business is almost a guarantee that that money is going to get burned through. There's nothing wrong with companies saying, hey, you know what? There's nothing to invest in. Take the cash back. That cash doesn't leave the market. It just goes back into other businesses. Which brings me to my third phase, which is this notion of connecting stories to numbers. As I said, when I first started teaching valuation, I used to think it was all about the numbers. It's really not about the numbers. To me, a good valuation is a bridge between stories and numbers. Point to a number and say, why is that number what it is? My answer is never going to be because I used a 25% growth rate for the first 5 years and 5% thereafter. It's always going to be a story. Every number in my valuation has to have a story behind it. With young companies, it's all about the story. When I valued Uber in June of 2014, this was a startup still, a young company losing a lot of money. My entire valuation was built around my story about Uber being an urban car service company. And when I finished my valuation, one of Uber's lead investors, Bill Gurley, venture capitalist, leading investor in Uber, said, you got the story all wrong. Uber is not a car service company, it's a logistics company. Notice how words have consequences? By using the word logistics, what's he done? He's tripled the size of his business. We could be in delivery and moving. He said, we're not just urban, we're going to be everywhere. We're not just going to have local networking benefits, we're going to have global networking benefits. In fact, when he told that story, I valued the story for him. My value for Uber was $6 billion, his value was $53 billion. What separated us was the story we told. With young companies, your story will define your valuation. It can mean the difference between a $6 billion valuation and a $53 billion valuation. With mature companies, it's the numbers that drive your valuation, because it's like being in chapter 34 of a 35 chapter book. So if I'm valuing Coca-Cola, I can't make you a young tech company and give you all these neat things. The older a company gets, the more the numbers drive the valuation. Which brings me to my final theme. You know the right CEO for a company is? If you're a young startup, who do you want as your CEO? It's all about story. You want Steve the visionary. I gave the name Steve for obvious reasons. You want the storyteller. As you become a young growth company, you want the builder. As you become a mature company, you need the defender. The right CEO for a company is different at different stages, and here's where the compressed life cycle kicks in. If you look at a company like GE, it took you 125 years to get from young to really old. Your CEOs passed on, mortality kicked in. But if you're a CEO of a young tech company, you could very well find yourself running a mature or a declining tech company, and the same CEO might no longer be the right CEO for you. I'll make a prediction. You're going to see a lot more disruption in management ranks because life cycles have become compressed.